Okay. All right, everybody, hello, and welcome to week 11. Laura is not here, but I have some of her notes, so just Lisa and I are talking. So first announcements, we've got 4 weeks left, so make sure you give us any feedback about what you would like included if you feel like there's been a hole somewhere in what we've been talking about and you need some more information somewhere. If you have incomplete work, get it in. What can happen if you don't think, if you're doing the graduate credit and you don't think you can get this in by the end of the semester, let us know. We can give you an incomplete, and then we'll give you sort of like, you need to complete this to get a C, you need to complete this to get a B. For an A, you need to complete this. We definitely know things are busy when you guys are teaching, so just let us work with you and try and figure this out. If you're doing PD, if you're doing this for PD hours, basically we look at what work you've turned in and sort of figure out how many hours we think that is, and then we give you PD hours based on that. If you're doing it for credit, all work needs to be in, and we need to be able to consider that. So just to let you know. For the articles, those weren't due, so there aren't any comments on those, but I just wanted to bring up there too that people can choose from, either one for middle school or one for elementary. Obviously things are different when you implement something in those two settings, just because of how siloed academics become in middle school. So I'll share just a couple of ways that people have done that before. We've seen a history teacher do it with a makerspace teacher, so that they would do a lot of the discussions in the history class, and then they would go and build. That both teachers were working there at the same time, so that sometimes they would have impromptu discussions during the makerspace time. Have seen a ELA teacher who taught mostly reading and obviously would incorporate some writing into a 6th grade class, and instead of just one of their projects, she had them do novel engineering instead. I think I've talked about that one before. So moving on to some past work, we've had some people turn some things in, so we're just going to briefly touch on stuff. I think, Lisa, you had some comments about the Periscope video.
Yeah, and I think Periscope video isn't due actually until tomorrow.
Oh, yes, these are the things that aren't due yet, yes.
But I did notice that Becky commented, and when she was noticing the builds that the kids were working on, she wrote that this is a great example of a functional design. They can easily test that it works. And this reminded me of something we've been talking about over the past several weeks. We've kind of talked about mentioning that in novel engineering projects, as students go through their first practice, they do begin to improve. And as they progress, they're going to begin to focus more on functionality and even start to consider their own forms of testing. I think once they have to present their first project to the entire class, it makes them realize that they have to kind of be on their A game for their projects, if that makes sense. So yes, I definitely think, Becky, you're right, that was a functional design. My guess is that's not their first attempt with a novel engineering practice. And I think many of you, since you've only maybe tried this out one time, by the time you get into your next practice with your students, you're going to see great improvements.
Great. So the planning document, we've seen a couple of them. If you haven't turned them in, we really look forward to seeing them.
And those they email.
Yes.
Those are coming through email. So yeah, feel free to email those along.
Let us know if you need help for that student interview or observation. It should be posted on Torch. The building video, there were some comments on that. Someone had mentioned that students really, their ideas begin to crystallize as they build, and we definitely see that sometimes kids they think they have a pretty good idea of what's going on, but then once they get those materials in their hand, they really sort of, their ideas grow a whole lot, and they become a lot better, and they're more able to think them out, and that comes sometimes from a lack of experience with the materials and just not really being able to anticipate how things will fit together and work. And then I think that's all I had for that one. If you want to move in,
okay.
What you had?
Yeah, Eric had a comment on the building video. He said, I think it's very important to the process as they explore how to restart here. Do they completely begin again, or move back to an open box and try from that spot? They are engaging in figuring out what happened to their design versus labeling it an all-out failure. And that was a great comment, Eric. And my response to this was, as this team aims to represent their ideas, there is evidence that shows they are moving towards becoming informed designers. Again, the Informed Design Matrix, great tool for you to use as you're watching these videos, and in your own classroom, of course. Instead of designing in a haphazard way, they're reflecting on how to improve upon their design. They realize that in order to do so, they need to start over. And that, to me, is evidence of these students are showing evidence of becoming more informed designers. So same thing with this clip. I would have to say that this is probably not the first time students in that team have worked on a project similar to this. Katie also stated, it seems like after they have figured out how to use their current design but make it functional, they feel more comfortable taking apart their design. Perhaps incorporating what they had already thought of justified taking apart the design. My response to Katie was, as this team discussed the improvements that they wanted to make, they became more accepting of failure. So as they had that discussion about, well, maybe we should do this, or maybe we should try this, then they decided, yes, it's okay to just start over. So I think through their collaboration, they started to feel a little bit more comfortable with going right back to the beginning.
Great. So going back to Muncha activity, Amy, who teaches high school, sort of brought up a point that even the older kids sometimes think those the board books, but the shorter text are too young for them and don't really jump in sometimes. And we definitely have, I've seen that a lot, that fifth graders, when they're reading something like that initially, they're sort of hesitant to do it because they feel like it's a little baby book. But then once they really understand what they're going to be doing and it's all about the building, most of the time I think kids get into them. And I think a lot of it has to do with, how you're reading it. And what I usually do is scan it and have a PDF and then put it on a board, a projector, so that it's really big and we can have conversations about the pictures as well. But that element seems to make it a little bit more fun for them. Moving on to Austin's Butterfly, I saw some really good comments this week about that. Kara, it was great to hear you actually use this approach in a makerspace activity. I just wanted to say that, because these strategies, even though we're talking about them as part of novel engineering, they really can be, they're universal and they can be used anywhere. It's really about getting kids to design and be a little more flexible and take some chances. And then Amy also sort of was asking people, well, how do people handle students thinking that they're done when, they can definitely push themselves a little bit more. So I encourage you to go into the Austin's Butterfly strand and respond to Amy directly. But the things that I always think that can push the kids are making sure that test is actually testing whether the design works or not, because if it doesn't work, that's pretty concrete evidence that you really need to go back and keep doing things. And also being really clear about what the criteria are before they start building. So that they, you have a little checklist of, you said it was going to do these 3 things, it's not doing that. It's not, even if it's just an aesthetic thing, you said it was going to look, be attractive to this girl character, this is definitely not. So just trying to figure out different ways to sort of hold them accountable for what they said that they were going to do and what they can do. Chapter 6.
Okay, as I went back over some of your Chapter 6 reflections, there was really some great comments that I wanted to highlight. Becky mentioned, I'm intrigued by the teacher's decision to group students according to the problem they wanted to solve. My response to this was that this week we've been doing Harvesting Hope as a novel engineering challenge in my classroom, which Kara, I know, is going to be trying that story as well. The story of Cesar Chavez. After reading the Chapter 6 journal, I decided to change it up in my own classroom a little bit in how I group students, which I've always had them come together as a team based on what problem they wanted to solve. But the way I switched it up this time was we identified the problem. Well, I read the story, the students identified the problems. Then we had a group discussion and we created a chart of what the problems were. But after that, this is where I switched it up a little. When I gave them time to reflect and sketch a problem that they would like to solve, I had them do this individually. And that article actually inspired me to test this out. And I think I will probably do it like this from now on in the future. Only because if you have a team of 2 students who come together and one student is a little bit more vocal or a stronger personality, sometimes their ideas win out. But when you have a student come to that initial team meeting who, may not be so vocal, they have their sketch in hand and they're ready to bring their ideas to the team instead of just taking on someone else's ideas. So this really, I noticed in my classroom this week that made a huge difference. As the kids did team up for their initial meeting with the person who wanted to solve a similar problem, I noticed that the people who would normally maybe not be as outspoken were really standing up for their design choices and ideas when they came together. So I just wanted to mention that, Becky, because you really made me think of that. Okay, Katie also noted from Chapter 6, I think Ann does a great job of explaining that the expectations for student groups need to be tailored to each specific group. And although I touched upon this last week, I think it's important to bring this up again. When students participate in a novel engineering project, I found that I have a different goal for each team. And I know we talked about this, but it's so important. You may be looking at collaboration for one team, where the other team, maybe you're looking for a different goal, maybe oral presentation skills. But I think it is important to note that you're going to have different goals for each team. And that's the beauty of novel engineering. There's so many skills that we're working on at the same time. Karen, Paul mentioned that in the past, they have always focused on the end product. However, they are paying closer attention to the entire process and the skills that students gain along the way. And this is similar to what we just talked about with Katie's reflection. It's really not the end product. The end product is great. It's nice to see this perfect end product that can test and is functional. But what's really important, I think, is the journey for these students. There's so many skills they're gaining from doing a novel engineering project. It's collaboration, it's teamwork, it's creativity, it's all the 21st century skills that we really need to be embracing in our classroom. So I'm happy that everybody's starting to notice these things as we move along with this course.
So that actually makes me think, I think I mentioned it to a group of teachers I did a PD with the other day, that a lot of kids, it does become even if you tell them it's about the process, they still really focus on that end product. In one class, we took quick videos when they were doing a test and it failed, so that we made up sort of like a bloopers reel. So when kids did something that wasn't working successfully, they were completely fine with it, because then they felt like they were somehow a success if they got in the bloopers reel.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, it just made it a little more fun, and like all of a sudden the focus wasn't that end product, and they were able to talk about like what went wrong and really laugh about it. So we just have a little bit more.
I love that.
It was pretty fast because we didn't actually have any new assignments. So for this week coming up, we have a video on what materials did they have. So look at this on Torch, and I picked this based on a comment in one of the discussion threads about students. I think it was Amy who said the feasibility of materials and using them in the class world, and sort of how was that a real world solution. Sort of that tension between, you have just this pile of stuff that, most of it's recycling, and what kids know, and that it might look like out in the real world. So I think that pairs nicely with, like, not only that, but throughout time. This one is, I think I've mentioned this one, this takes place like in colonial times, but what materials did people have at that point? So how realistic is what they're building? So I think each classroom approaches it differently, each teacher, and all the students sort of approach it differently, even within their projects. But it's really great for them to be sort of grappling with this idea and trying to figure it out. And, as a teacher, you're going to figure out what works for your class if you do want to let each group sort of figure that one out for themselves. For the reading, we have experienced teachers noticing and responding to students' engineering. So this is taking a step back. Instead of looking at kids and their thinking as we've been doing, we're going to start to look at teachers a little bit and sort of some of the decisions they make, especially within engineering. So for that, you'll read it and make comments. So don't forget your interview and observations. That's due next week, so December 6th. If you need anything for that, either technical to get your video up on the on Torch, or just trying to figure out exactly what you can do to ask kids questions, we are more than happy to help. And don't forget to start reading and discussing your book as part of your unit implementation. I've got nothing else to add, Lisa?
Nope, that's it.
Semi-short one. Good luck, you guys, and please let us know if you need anything. Thanks.